The one, the only, Ben Sion. Good morning and welcome to Yeshiva YouTube Daily Double. Today we're learning Masechah Shekalim, starting the fifth parak Hey, Mishnayos Aleph and Beis. Aleph says, Elohen hamamunim shayu mikdash. They had certain people that were in charge of different things in the Beis HaMikdash. I will say these people, according to the Rav, are probably the people that first had these duties when the Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt, the second Beis HaMikdash. Obviously, they died and other people took over, but it talks about the first people because they basically set the standard for what was expected. Yochanan and Pinchas ala Chosamos. Yochanan and Pinchas was in charge of this. Basically, it was like seals. You know, you gave money to, you needed money to buy karbanos. It was sort of like you go to a casino and you get poker chips. So you get a ticket, you give money, you get a ticket in order to exchange it for the karbanos that you need, or for the wine that you need, or the oil that you need for your karbanos. Achia and Esachim. Achia was in charge of distributing the wine libations. Masiskim and Shmuel al Payasos, he was in charge of distributing that voted to the Kohanim. The Kohanim did a raffle to figure out who would be in charge of different avodas. Piskia alakinin, Piskia, the Mishnah says that Mordechai from Megillas Esther, he was in charge of the kinim. He was a very smart person. The kinim are basically a pair of birds that you need for if you're a zav or a zav agdola or you're ledes, you bring a pair of birds. He was in charge of that. The Gemara says, the Mishnah says in Maseches Avos, it was very complicated to figure out. If you learn Maseches Kinim, it's very complicated, so he would figure out all the different halachas about that. Lama nikra shmo Piskah, why is his name Piskah? Shabbosech b'dvaram v'darshan. He would open up, anyone who wanted an explanation of everything, he would open up and explain. He knew that to explain very well. Yodea Shivim Lashon. Not only that, he knew 70 languages, right? We saw in the Megillah Esther, he was able to tell Achashverosh about the plot against him. Ben Achia ala choli me'ayim. Ben Achia was in charge of dealing with the sick Kohanim. Kohanim got sick. They walked barefoot. They ate a lot of meat. Apparently they drank water. Apparently that's not a good combination. So they were very sick. A lot of times they were sick in their stomach. So he would distribute medicine to them. Nechunya ben Chofer Nechunya was in charge of digging in Yerushalayim wells and pits to store water. So people who are made aliyah regel had water to drink. Gavini was in charge of announcing in the morning. We learned of Stachas Yuma. He announced right before Alos HaShachar, they should start doing that voda. Ben Gever al Nil Shar, and Ben Gever was responsible for locking the gates and opening them in the morning. Ben Bechi ala Pakia. Ben Bechi was in charge of the Pakia to wake up the Kohanim that were watching the Beis HaMikdash overnight so they shouldn't fall asleep. Ben Arzal at Saltal, Ben Arzal was in charge of when the Levium sang, they also had accompaniment, musical accompaniment. He was in charge of musical accompaniment. He was, what do they call the maestro? Hahugros ben Levi Hugros ben Levi was in charge of leading the singing. Beis Garmo Ma'isa Lechem Apanim. Beis Garmo was in charge of making Lechem Apanim. Pesach Yuma teaches how they were very knowledgeable in that. Beis Avtinas, from the house of Avtinas on Ma'isa Sekteris, they didn't know how to make the Ketores. Elazar al Parochos. Elazar was in charge of making the Parochos, right? They had different curtains they needed, especially divide the Kodesh and Kodesh Hadashim. Pinchas al Malbush. Pinchas was in charge of the Kohanim don't had to wear special clothes. He was in charge of taking care of those clothes, laundering them, and making sure they had the right clothes. Beis Ein Polchasin Mishlosha Gizbarim Mishiva Amar Kalin. In the Beis HaMikdash, at least 3 people. Gizbarim were in charge of taking the money, right? There was money stored for Bedek HaBayis, so up to the Beis HaMikdash. 3 people together, they had a consensus in order to spend money of the Bedek HaBayis. So Mishiva Amar Kalin. And there were 7 people that they were in charge of opening the storehouses in the Azara. So, if the Gizbarim said they needed money, they had to go to the Amar Kol and the 7 people to open up. They all had maybe 1 key. They needed 7 keys. And they opened up the storehouse to take the money. And the Mishnah makes a blanket statement. Any community, not just the Beis HaMikdash, if you're going to have funds of the community, it has to be distributed by 2 people, not 1 person. Except Ben Achia, who's in charge of distributing medicine for Kohanim that were sick, Velozar she'ala parochos, and Lazar, who was in charge of restoring and making sure there's parochos between the Kodesh and Kodesh Hadashim. Certain times, based on Mikdash, they didn't have walls; they needed parochos. Because most of Klal Yisrael said it's an immediate need. At least people who are sick or they don't have parochos, so therefore they accepted upon themselves. Even if 1 person did it, it would be okay with them. But to use community funds, you need at least 2 people that are in charge of that, and they have to agree. I hope you enjoyed today's share. Stay tuned for Iyam Mitzion, where I discuss Mishnah Beis in greater detail.